Hello and welcome to this episode of Standing Apart, the podcast that explores why being different is a superpower, with me, Nigel Ridpath. This week's show is an interview I recorded with Hugh Taylor of Road Knight Taylor. We had so much to talk about in terms of Road Knight Taylor's role in the energy sector and Hugh's extraordinarily purposeful approach to leadership. So much, in fact, that we've split this interview across 2 episodes. So why not subscribe to the podcast right now to make sure you don't miss part 2. We did the interview in Hugh's podcast studio down in Burford in the Cotswolds, which was a real treat. Before we get started, I just want to express my thanks to Hugh's studio manager, Abby, for her production skills during the recording. I'm delighted to say that I have the CEO of Road Knight Taylor, that's Hugh Taylor, here with me today. We have so much to talk about. I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into it. And what I'd like to do is just start off with a little bit more of an understanding about what Road Knight Taylor does and the industry sector that it's in.
Obviously pleased to do that. If you don't mind, just to start with, I must say that the last kind of 2 or 3 weeks since we put this date in the diary, been a little bit stressful for me, and because the concept that I have some kind of superpower around being different, and that's behind our success, what success we have achieved. That kind of sat a little bit uncomfortably with me. And in order to overcome that, I thought, well, it's fine. I can come up with lots of things to say about what I think are the amazing people that we have here. I think I'm incredibly lucky to have become surrounded by the most amazing people here within the team and our clients and the champions that we've got. But also because really, I don't think we are doing anything that is really different here. It might be unusual that we are doing so many things that wouldn't be considered the norm, but we don't do anything here that I haven't read about in a book or on a podcast or on a webinar. You know, that kind of the gratitude that I have for the amazing people who really are doing things differently and achieving mastery and sharing that with with the world, and people like me can benefit from that. I'm incredibly grateful in that regard. I also don't feel that we've kind of cracked any great code here, even though we do achieve some fairly unusual results, but I don't feel we've cracked any code here. I think that what we're doing works in this very niche situation that we've got ourselves in, and also we haven't achieved any great scale either. So I think that's worth considering that we've only got there are 15 in the team, equivalent of 12 full-time equivalents, and that isn't scale, and also it's only worked in this country, and so there's an awful lot of things that I think it's great, I love what we're doing, but it's not necessarily look at me look at this superpower I've got.
Well, to kick off this interview with a slight agreeable disagreement, I think, and we'll get into this in a lot more detail, that the difference with what you're doing here is the purposefulness with which you're doing those things. And I think that is actually, it's not unique, but it does make you stand out from the crowd. But coming back to my original question, let's just set the context a little bit in terms of the business environment that you operate in.
Sure. Yeah. So, in a nutshell, what we do is, and you might have seen, and listeners might have heard on the news, that organisations are struggling to connect their larger projects to the electrical grid, And that's where our specialist engineers come in. They help clients to identify, understand, and often overcome their grid connection challenges. And that's what we do. We are deeply focused. Some 5 years ago, because we were fairly generalist energy consultants, we were kind of good at just about everything that we did, but we weren't great. I'm a huge fan of Jim Collins' Good to Great, one of the best books I've ever read. And in there, one of the key concepts is about focus. And so about 5 years ago, we were doing an awful lot of things, and we realised that the one thing that we could be the best in the world at, we thought, was to focus on grid connections, specifically on the GB network. And so we have that technical, commercial, regulatory expertise around very specifically the GB network. And having focused on grid connections, we then focused actually within, so we first of all focused within grid consultancy, but then we focused in grid connections. And then within grid connections, we fairly soon realised that actually there was one area, one band of services throughout a project lifecycle, connection project lifecycle, where we could actually bring far greater value, where there is a real scarcity of expertise, where that differential between the fees that we charge and the outcomes that we could achieve are really quite extreme. And we just kind of doubled down on that, really. I guess, it wasn't saying this is what we're going to do as a strategy, but we essentially kind of fired an arrow. And this is a sort of a James Clear thing, actually, from his book, Atomic Habits. And he suggested you fire an arrow and you then move the target to where the arrow strikes. And that's very much what we did. We looked at the services where we thought we could deliver the greatest impact, and we just kind of doubled down on those. So it wasn't really us saying this is going to work, let's do this. And now I think we use that kind of framework for our decisions as we go forward.
So who would be a typical customer?
So a typical customer could be a very big industrial player. So we look after some of the top 10 energy users in the UK, and who might be decarbonising their operations, which might be gas-powered operations. And if they're decarbonising those to electric, more renewable technologies, then we can help them in order for them to achieve the connections that they need to make that transition. Big data centre developers, so we're looking at achieving in the UK. The UK needs something like sort of 10 gigawatts of data centres, and so that's a very busy market for us. And I guess our kind of home original audience was large-scale energy developers. So we look after their household names, kind of the really big energy developers and operators, big energy companies that we'd all know and love.
So this is both the demand and the supply end.
Yeah, very much.
So this might be, so you mentioned people who need a lot of electricity power, but also the generators. So it might be solar farms or wind farms, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. So you'd have those that are generating or storing electricity. You have those that are using electricity and are going to use a hell of a lot more of it because of that transition. And then you also have some, so we've got some very big airport clients who are looking to decarbonise their operations by putting very large-scale renewables behind the meter, as referred to as, and helping them achieve that. So
Okay.
We would work with, so the network operators. So just here in Oxfordshire, we sit on SSE's network. And over the border, just a few miles away, we've got National Grid Electricity Distributions Network, for example. And so we'd be helping, and all the way up in Scotland, you've got SSEN and Scottish Power. And so there's 6 distribution network operators that we would help people to connect to. So we'd be working with the engineers and the policymakers at those network operators in order to find a solution and then to make it work. And our clients have extraordinary expertise in and of themselves as well,
Right.
in grid, and also up at a National Grid's transmission network up at sort of 400,000 volts. So that's the motorway of the electricity networks, and would be helping a lot of people connect to those, and therefore liaising with those, that with National Grid as that transmission owner, and the National Energy System Operator as well, NESO, in order to get those connected. So there are an awful lot of players that we kind of dovetail and coordinate with.
So tell me about connectology. Connectology.
Connectology. Yeah, so I do like a bit of branding, and I did trademark connectology. So we only have 5 subject matter experts here. They're specialist connections engineers. They're the connectologists, as we call them. And so connectologies, first of all, it's a way of me essentially kind of branding them, I guess. But also an awful lot of the time and energy and expertise here goes into sharing insight and know-how and influence and thought leadership within the industry, so that others can identify and understand and overcome their own connections challenges. So there's not an awful lot goes on here in terms of podcasts, and we're in this video podcast studio, which is our own facility here in Burford. And so podcasts and webinars and round tables and sitting on industry working groups and specialist connections groups and government task forces. So connectology is essentially, it's that non-fee earning part of what we do, is connectology. And it's at the moment it's over 8% of our clients' fees go to fund that connectology work, and it's quite a lot, and it's something that we enjoy. We're quite proud of.
I don't know whether you've reached that moment yet, but when I've done that sort of thing before and kind of packaged something up and given it a brand, that immense feeling of pride where somebody who doesn't know you starts referring to that brand in some way in the and I wonder whether you've reached that point yet. Have you heard connectology being mentioned in circles when you went in the room?
Well, what I eventually felt sort of proud of was because I was, I feel slightly uncomfortable about it, branded the connectologists, the 5 of them as connectologists, and I think it sat a little bit uncomfortably with them at the start, so I can think of 1 or 2 in particular. Some of them I think that they absolutely loved it, and actually to have seen the industry really embrace it, and for all of them actually to really be quite proud of wearing that badge. It's and I'm that's made me very proud.
And that's increasing their personal brands.
I think it. I don't think it's bad for them. So and our webinars, we would typically have over 400 register for the webinars, and the podcasts have had tens of thousands of downloads. And bearing in mind how incredibly niche we are in what we do, I think it's great. It has kind of caught fire. So they are kind of relative celebrities, I guess, when they go in this niche. So when they go to, for example, if there's a National Grid run an event and they go along, people recognise them and want to go and meet them and speak to them, which is really cool.
Yeah, let's. I'm going to dive back into ancient history, and then I want to bring things right up to date. My father, back in the 60s and early 70s, worked for the Central Electricity Generating Board. He was one of their first computer engineers doing modelling about demand usage back in the day. What in today's current energy world would he still recognise 50 years later, and what would be completely alien to him?
So, first of all, just the fact that we've been through privatisation, that's huge. CEGB, is no more. So that privatisation would be one thing, and the other thing was that originally, in the CEGB days, there were very few, very large generators connected to the network up at that sort of motorway level, up at that 400,000 volt level, with that power then being distributed down through the sort of dual carriageways and A roads and B roads down to homes and businesses, and that's in that CEGB time, that's what it was. And now that's been completely turned on its head. There are actually, I don't know how many, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of generators, right down to those little kind of 2 or 3, 4 kilowatt systems, solar arrays on people's rooftops, and big solar farms and wind farms and big gas-fired generators. And these are all connected down at those B roads, those A roads, and on those dual carriageways. And so it's a very, very different world, and that's where these connections challenges come from. And at the moment, we've got a queue in Great Britain alone of something between 8,000 and 10,000 large-scale projects. These are big projects waiting to connect to the grid, and the grid just can't cope with that level of power, essentially. So it's a very different world.
So, and that neatly brings me to how I wanted to bring things up to date. There's been a lot of talk about the time it takes to connect to the grid. The Labour Party before the last election were talking about it extensively. It seemed crazy that there were those big schemes, as you say, ready to go, but it was going to take them years and years to actually get that energy into the network. What have you seen in since July last year, when the Labour government came to power, that has really changed things for your world?
Quite a lot, actually, and surprising change. There was already underway, because of that problem that you've highlighted, of people looking to be waiting 10, 20 years just to get a connection because of all the what's called reinforcement work, so the upgrading of the network that would be required, and how long it takes in order to do that. These reinforcement projects are really significant. So this connections reform, which we've been heavily involved with here, at least the team have. I'm a complete layperson, but I'm not supposed to be technical. I have to be very sort of candid about that. The connections reform is the biggest shake-up since privatisation. So since your father's CEGB days, this would be the big one.
Right.
And it's such a massive change to the way that the networks are run. And that was all underway anyway. But it became very clear that we actually had, in this queue of projects wanting to connect to the grid, we had something like 3 times more battery storage schemes than we need, for example, an awful lot more of other technologies. I don't want to go into kind of the details. I'll probably be wrong, but I can tell you that there is massive oversubscription. And we hadn't really come up with, as an industry, a way of addressing that, because what we really needed, in order to get projects connected quickly, we needed the right projects to be at the front of the queue. Whereas if there were an awful lot more, for example, of battery storage projects that might have been further ahead in the queue, but actually they weren't really needed in order to deliver clean power, and the government's Clean Power 2030 initiative, was all about getting enough of the right stuff connected in order that we have clean power by 2030. So what they did was they actually intervened and said, right, we are going to pick winners, which historically governments just haven't done that in sort of my time within grid. And what they asked the National Energy System Operator to do was to work out just what we needed, and in terms of different technologies in different parts of the country, so storage, solar, wind, genset schemes, whatever it might be, and then to reorder the queue in part according to that. And that was a very, very significant intervention. And unfortunately, there are going to be an awful lot of losers, but what it's done is it's sort of accelerated that massive attrition of projects that might well have happened, you'd have expected to have happened, just through sheer market forces over the next 10 or 20 years. So, it's a fascinating time for the industry. It's a very stressful time for an awful lot of developers who've got a lot of projects. But the work that's been going on within the industry, the way that the industry's come together to collaborate and to find the right way it's been remarkable to, I guess, just to witness. Really, I've been very proud to be a part of this industry, the way that it's conducting itself.
So, given that market is moving at a rate, as you say, that has not been seen since privatisation, which is 30 years ago, 35 years ago, how is that changing who your customers are and how you go to market? Have there been some changes around that?
I think our client base, as projects go from smaller developers who are out prospecting, essentially doing what we refer to as origination work, which is finding sites, hopefully finding capacity on the grid and securing those grid connections and then going to planning. Once they've achieved planning and they've got those what are called project rights, then they tend to sell them to energy investors. And whilst 5 years ago we would have been spending most of our time working for these pure play developers who are going and securing those project rights, now we tend to be spending most of our time working for very big investors who are actually buying those project rights, so they have to carry out due diligence. And obviously, if you think the grid connection is the umbilical cord for the project, and it's what all of that, all those pounds flow through in order to pay back and then hopefully give them a return on that investment. That grid connection is really important, particularly when you look at the fact that people are struggling to get it connected in an appropriate time frame. So we help them with their due diligence so that they're essentially buying the right projects, or at least they understand the issues within the projects that they're buying, and that they're priced accordingly, and then that work to actually go through and get them connected and energized and sort of on through the later part of that project life cycle. So what it's doing is effectively for us, it's bigger, later stage, long-term investors. Okay. You were saying there that if you had let's say a large solar scheme, they would need some help in working out how to connect to the grid even before it goes to planning. So I'm thinking in our local area we've got the Botley West solar farm. I'm involved in it politically, but if it goes ahead, it's going to be one of Europe's largest solar farms, and it's only a few miles away from where we're talking today. So that they will have needed help, given where they're trying to site it, to work out how they're going to get those connections to the national grid, and that's the kind of thing. And that would be pre-planning. Yeah, everything starts with it. So the planning is a huge cost. Most projects aren't connecting at 400,000 volts, and that Botley West project is huge in terms of acres. I can't remember how big it is, but it's enormous. Like 1,500 acres or something absolutely enormous. In order to go through planning and to get a project so that it is shovel ready is for a 50 megawatt project that's just connecting to your local network might cost £400,000 or £500,000. It's a huge amount of money. Planning is a massive chunk of that. So you don't want to make that investment unless you're confident you can get a grid connection. And so the first thing you do typically is carry out a feasibility study and then secure those grid connection rights, and then everything moves from there. So grid is the very start and the very end of the process. It's fundamental.
Right. Okay. Tell me a little bit more about the makeup of the 15 people in the organisation. You mentioned these 5 connectologists. What other roles kind of make up the team?
Yeah, so we have those 5 subject matter experts. They're the fee earners essentially, and sitting behind them, I think it's quite unusual here that we have, first of all, a pretty big ops function to support them. They do their brilliant work, and the rest of the team is there really just to provide a really solid platform for them to do, amazing things off. And the operations function is absolutely central to that. They don't have to organise their time. They don't have to do any business development. So we have the business development function. I mentioned that we have a lot of output in terms of podcasts and webinars and the like. So there's quite a lot of resource goes into both producing that content and distributing it as well. There's me from a leadership perspective, and Lucy, my co-director and wife, so we're sort of family-owned business, oversees the ops side of the business. So yeah, there's a pretty big team, and I think a pretty strong team behind them, all relative to the fact that there's only 5 of them, and then there's 15 of us in the team in total.
Yeah, I mean that's quite an interesting ratio, isn't it? 2 operational people supporting one person who's earning the fees.
Yeah, if you look at it in terms of full-time equivalents, it's a bit less, and we are. So the last connectologist that we found, so specialist connections engineer, was over 18 months ago. I've been trying ever since to find another one, and it's really hard because we are so incredibly specific about what we need, and we're not about growth here at all in terms of growth in headcount. We are playing a very different game to most, I think, and what we're about is the growth of the individual. And when we do bring someone in, it has to be an extraordinary fit, and trying to find that is really hard. But if you think that let's say there are 7 at the moment full-time supporting those 5 fee earners, but actually those 7 I think should be able to, as they grow as individuals, should be able to manage the work in terms of bringing it in and helping them get it out the door, should be able to manage the work of double the number of fee earners and connectologists. So that ratio is where we are now, but it's going to change over time. But if I add 1 new connectologist every sort of year or so, I'll be happy. We're playing a very patient game here.
Let's look at what you're doing in the business at the moment. You operate a non-compressed 4-day work week. Your customer satisfaction scores are in the top 1% of businesses globally. In spite of your 4-day work week and your team being paid at the top of the market, for 5-day week salaries, you achieve net profit margins that are in the top 10% of consultancies globally. There will be a lot of people listening to this who will be very interested in how you're achieving that, probably very envious of that position. How have you got to this position today?
Yeah, I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the fact that I don't think that we have kind of cracked any code, or at least I think we have cracked a code for the exact people we've got here right now in the industry that we're in, with these, frankly, the most balmy, benign market conditions that we could ever hope for, we haven't had a headwind yet. So those results are great, and I'm really I'm thrilled that's where we are now. But it's not we haven't cracked any code. So how do we get here? Well, first of all, the luck of finding extraordinary people who have wanted to spend their time here and have stuck around. That's I think at the very core of it. And the fact that I've been very lucky, as I'd said, to have had a lot of amazing books and podcasts and the like recommended to me that I've read and taken some of it on board and implemented it. And so what we've done is over time have implemented lots and lots of little things, some of them quite small, some of them quite significant, in order to increase the impact that I think. I mentioned Jim Collins and Good to Great. That finding our focus was the absolute key. We wouldn't be where we are now. It's all relatively speaking, but we wouldn't be where we are now if we hadn't found our focus, and if we hadn't been very disciplined about sticking to that focus and actually constantly narrowing that focus and making sure that we were always doing something different. So back to doing something different to others. That's I guess is the crux of it.
How did the 4-day work week come about?
I mean, we've all heard of it, and about 3 years ago, I guess it kind of came into my consciousness. And the fourth connectologist that we hired, I was talking to her about it before she came on board, and it's something that she was quite keen on the idea of. And I said to her, well, we'll do that. And I put a lot of thought, I guess. We got to a point here where we were very busy. I thought that the best way to give us resilience and longevity was to be very long on clients. We had so many clients because I thought if we have so many clients, then we'll always have work. And that, that kind of, it worked to that extent, but it meant that we had more work than we could deliver. So we were saying to our really big sort of FTSE 100 clients, yes, of course we can do that piece of work for you, but we're not going to be able to do it for 6 weeks. A lot of the stuff that we do is relatively time critical. So it was a bad situation to be in, and what was happening was that we were all feeling the pressure to deliver more work than actually probably was right. So I read Hyperfocus by Chris Bailey, and another really cool book that I read was Get Organised by Ciara Conlon, and I came to realise that being as we are in the knowledge economy, and the fact that if we look after the brains of our people here and that kind of cognitive capacity, then they're better able to work with clients in order to come up with extraordinary solutions that can be game-changing for their projects. And bearing in mind that for our clients, these connections, they are mission critical. It's only right, really, that we look after those brains and give them the best. And so, having looked at the situation of us having all of these clients and having to essentially kind of disappoint the really big ones, we realised that we needed to change things, and reducing the client base by 80% in the end, to reduce the workload by 50% and go down to a 4-day work week, meant that suddenly that was righted, really, and that cognitive capacity returned, and well, I mean, the rest is history, really. The results that you mentioned there, and we've got so many more kind of sort of industry beating stats that, you know, so it's definitely worked.
Well, when we had a chat before we recorded today, you used the phrase burning ships, and I really like that. Explain what you meant about that in terms of the context of the four-day week.
Yeah, burning ships is something that I think Cortez used to do when they. So this is, you know, this is not cool, invading other countries. But what he used to do is get his armies to burn their ships, and they could not escape. There was no retreat, and so I kind of liked that burnt ships thing with the 4-day work week. We knew we were going to do it because we knew it was the right thing to do. So instead of saying we are going to trial the 4-day work week, it wasn't that. It was, we're doing the 4-day work week. We're going to trial a particular, sort of modus operandi, and so that's what we did. And we might have tweaked it a very little bit, but yeah, there was never going to be any going back. And I think that forced us to get it right. And in getting it right, we spent a year or so of having training every Monday morning, starting with, we still have it. So we had one this morning just before you arrived, and we call it the Get Organised training. But that's a hangover from the fact that the very first book that we went through in the training, and Nikki Pillinger, one of the connectologists, actually does the training for us every week. The very first book that we went through it's an Audible original audio book called Get Organised by Ciara Conlon, who's a professor from Cork University, I think. And we went through that methodically, and it was, I think, extraordinary in terms of the impact that it had on the productivity of the team. And we just kept on going in that vein. And productivity, increasing the impact that you can have with the resource that you've got, whilst having the team be really happy, healthy, thriving, both at work, but also, you know, in the evenings when they get home and on the weekends, and, you know, having as much energy on the weekend to do whatever cool things they might want to be doing on the weekend as they do during the week is, you know, I think is a very much a win-win situation. The two feed off each other, so we kind of go on in that vein.
I always find it fascinating hearing about an industry that I know almost nothing about. I'm aware of the need for data centers, for instance, and that they're hungry for power, but I had little idea about how it all plugs together, so I found that really intriguing. We go into it much deeper in part 2 of the interview, but you start to get a sense of how intentional Hugh is about leadership of his business. The trademarking of the term connectology, the burnt ship strategy, the drive for productivity so that they can move to a 4-day week. It reminded me of an interview with the CEO of rugby club Saracens when they were on the verge of domination of English and European rugby 10 years ago. Too much of sport operates under the tyranny of the result, CEO Edward Griffith said. The core principle at Saracens is that we gather talented people together, treat them unbelievably well, and in return they try unbelievably hard. That is it. Everything else, winning or losing matches, winning or losing cups, are just outcomes. They are not the primary aim. We exist to have a positive impact on as many people as possible. I think Hugh has the same mindset. Do the right thing by your people and your customers, and the results will look after themselves. In part 2, we go on to talk about another forthcoming burnt ship scenario. Hugh's efforts to distill the business down into one simple North Star to guide decision making, and the importance of holding out for the right people. We also take a look at what's next for the business. We've put Hugh's recommended reading list in the show notes, and a reminder to subscribe to the podcast to ensure that you don't miss part 2, which will drop on the 31st of March. So we're coming towards the end of the show. I hope you got something out of it that you could apply in your own business. If you did, please tell your friends. Remember, all of the previous episodes are still available, including deep dives into the retail sector, the music industry, and market disruptors. We're looking for sponsorship for the show. If you want to discuss cost-effective sponsorship options, please contact us at standingapartpod@hotmail.com. This show can only survive with people listening to it regularly, and no matter how good we make it, we have to beat those dratted algorithms. So every subscribe, rating, and like that you give it on your favourite podcast app really makes a world of difference to us. Go on, do it now. Thank you. Until next time, whatever you do, stand apart from the crowd. Standing Apart is a Sun Bear Consulting production.